Thank you very much, Robin. I would like to say that it is a great honor for me to be invited. Thank you for the background notes. My life is really interesting. It is not coming to its end, I believe. I believe that there is a bright future still ahead of us, and it is too soon that we make any conclusions from this background. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, dear friends and guests of Chatham House for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. And I'm thankful for Chatham House being one of the most influential hubs. Back in 2015, you created a special program as a critical friend of Ukraine for in-depth studies of the Ukrainian context, I believe. And those studies help us find answers to some very topical questions. And I would like to put some questions to you before you reciprocate. This is a dialogue, but I'm sure that every one of you understand very well what kind of scope of problems we are talking about after the Russian full-fledged invasion. This is of utmost priority, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world, not just for our people, but all the peoples in this continent and in the world. I'm absolutely certain. This is the full scope incursion, one of the remnants of the bad old times of the 18th century, perhaps. Some challenges, the cruelty of the Russian force, of the people who invaded Ukraine, and their great despise expressed as regards all the international covenants and conventions, human rights. That's what is most important for me, the integrity of our borders and the states in Europe as such. Why Russia is doing that, I wonder? Well, because they believe that the responsibility can be postponed for decades, if it ever comes. And they do not believe that they can be made responsible for the war crimes because they have the power of the nuclear state and the nuclear blackmail. After many decades, we can see this put bluntly by the Russian propaganda mongers. They are calculating how much time is needed for a nuclear missile to hit the European capitals. They are talking about that openly, how they can make a nuclear blast in the ocean to wash away the British Isles. And with the infographics, they boast of Russia being capable of turning any state into nuclear ashes. That's what they say, literally, nuclear ashes. Why is this happening? Well, we are convinced that this is the feeling of impunity. They believe that business as usual would always come back to the relations between Russia and European countries. There are some politicians in Europe still which are not ashamed of their relations after all Russia did in Europe has done. And the political chaos and scores of countries can be instigated because of the foodstuffs crisis. They blackmail Europe to, first they wanted to launch the Nord Stream 2. That was a crisis, energy crisis in Europe, and they were purposefully not providing enough gas, and the gas prices hit the ceiling, the historic ceiling, the historic cap back then. And that was to the detriment of all the European countries' situations. Now we have our seaports being blocked by Russia. They captured them, some of them, and the global market suffers because of the lack of supplies of some key food products, grain, sunflower oil, maize, and other agricultural types of produce, and we can see the results of that, but I'm sure that we do not see it yet because there is enough analysis to see the full picture. We'll see that. There's some the deficit in sunflower oil. The agricultural business is being now undermined by the lack of our supplies, and the basic foodstuffs are lacking in some countries already. This is the pressure for the prices to rise in North Africa, Middle East, and some Asian countries, and then that will gradually cover other regions of the world. The neediest will suffer. The people with the lowest income and the middle class, because the political repercussions of that can be dangerous, and that's what I'm saying, and that's what they are call a political chaos, the foodstuffs deficit, the food security. So the audience, the Russian war against our country, that looked like a bilateral affair. For some people, they would smile at that and say that that was kind of incursion, a kind of special military operation in Russian terms. Now the picture is seen differently, in a more serious fashion, but this is the second day of the full-fledged war, and we can see no end of it yet. And we cannot feel any willingness of the Russian side to end it. And we cannot have satisfactory answers to the challenges presented by Russia. Starting from the 24th of February, there haven't been any single day when we wouldn't have any negotiations with our team to get the necessary military equipment and to accommodate the sanctions against Russia, to arrange for the necessary cooperation, to document and investigate all the war crimes. We haven't seen a single day without some siege of Mariupol by the Russian force, one of the examples, mind you. And every day we would try to look for some diplomatic solutions for saving people and arranging for the humanitarian corridors to accomplish that. We are in contact with all the influential parties there. We are already preparing the big plan of reconstruction for Ukraine, because we are absolutely certain that we will defend our independence and regain that territory, and we believe in power of the world. This is not believing in miracles, working miracles for that matter. From reason, pure reason, we can say that the response of the world to such an aggression should be instantaneous. And in fact, it takes months for us to discuss the same things over and over again. For example, the oil embargo against Russia, blocking of all the banking sector for the terrorist state, and supplies of weapons, military equipment for Ukraine to defend itself. And I'm very grateful to the countries which are helping us from the very first days on an everyday basis. And for them, it is clear what the real scope of this threat is. But some countries underestimate it. For the most part, the challenges posed by Russia have not yet received adequate responses. We have to continuously look for the new toolkit, the new determination to stop not just Russia, but any potential aggressor. Russia is the aggressor, and Ukraine suggested United 24, the U-24 arrangement to update the global security system for us to be able to prevent, or at least to respond within 24 hours to any kind of aggression, or within 24 hours to provide any kind of assistance for the victim of that aggression and to restore peace, or any kind of man-made or natural catastrophe to get a response in this way, so that the community would provide for the country in question all the necessary assistance to save people. And thanks to such a global system of response, we can guarantee that it will never happen again when millions of people are under threat of physical destruction or forced deportation or starvation, any kind of destruction. So these are the issues that should be now met with answers from politicians, from experts, from the societies in question. And I would like to put some questions to you now. What can be done for the responsibility for war crimes to come not in decades, but to be almost immediate, like with the usual criminal investigation and adjudication? And what kind of sanctions can be convincing enough for Russia and any kind of aggressor to prove to them that they have to respect the international law? What global solutions do we need to control the weapons of mass destructions and to prevent any kind of attempt to use it and blackmailing with it? And so that no aggressor can even mention such an option. And what kind of sanctions should we impose in response to the blackmailing with nuclear weapons or chemical weapons for that matter? What can convince the politicians of the world to make those issues practical, not just discussable? And I suppose you will offer some opinions, contribute some answers to my questions. This is your experience, this is your expertise, because the answers we all need. The world needs your answers. Every person watching us now, and the people who will watch us, and people who try to answer these questions every day. And you can contribute to the U24 arrangement that we suggested as an option. This is our initiative. The more initiatives we have, the more people will realize the global scope of such challenges and the global scope of the answers that should be supplied. Thank you very much. Glory be to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, President Zelensky, and for laying out your thinking of where you are at the moment. I could say thank you for asking me some questions, or us some questions. I fear that if we turn this into a more typical Chatham House type of seminar, then my members would be very upset with me because they would listen to us talking and not you talking. And perhaps what we can do is, with my colleagues, is actually write you a little note after this with some very specific answers. I will simply say three very quick things. How do you avoid nuclear blackmail? You don't accept it. And I think this is some of the language that we're hearing from NATO leaders in particular right now, is not to accept the threat. How do you make sure that this kind of aggression is not treated with impunity? I think you need to look at this as a war of aggression, not simply the conduct of human rights, appalling abuses and war crimes. Without the war itself, you wouldn't have the war crime. And Chatham House has hosted a number of meetings about the concept of this being a war of aggression and how that could be then punished in court. But I think, sadly, quick justice in international law is extremely rare. So in any case, I'm not going to say any more and use up time, but you ask extremely pertinent questions, and I think you deserve answers. We'll provide some additional ones to you, if I could say, later on. If I may just ask you one opening question from myself, and I will simply say to our members, we have 160 questions there, which we're obviously not going to get through. What I would say is, please read the questions, because actually members of Chatham House tend to ask very good questions. So you will find a fascinating set of perspectives just by reading through them. And also, if you think any are especially good, you can upvote them. Click on the little thumbs up and they will go to the top of the sheet. And then I can go to those first and make sure that some of the most popular questions are asked. It will help me do my job. President Zelensky, just one question that maybe is a broad one. It didn't touch on what you said, but much of the world, I think, was surprised by the resistance that the Ukrainian people have presented to the invasion by Russian forces. I want to ask you, were you surprised that Russians in Kherson, in Kharkiv, in Donbass, that they have given their lives, that mayors of small villages, mayors of towns, who are often thought as being the people that the Russian forces could turn maybe to their advantage. Have you been surprised by how united Ukrainians have been in the face of this conflict? That's my first question.
Was I surprised? And the nation that we have, I am pleased to have another opportunity to answer such a question, because it is always pleasant to talk about things you know very well. And I am a living witness of how our people responded to that aggression from Russia. I just can issue two signals. This is a dialogue, so I would like to respond to what you said about the nuclear blackmail. You said that is unacceptable, just like that. And it is my idea, maybe it's a rhetorical one, but we do not accept terrorism, right? Nobody in this audience accepts terrorism, and we do not talk to terrorists, right? Any kind of terrorists, but nevertheless, they exist. They do exist as a phenomenon, and they act and they live on. So I'm not criticizing your points. I would like to share my opinion from my experience and from what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening to Ukraine. And people are all concerned here because the nuclear weapon is being wielded by some power. We do not accept this, but can this lack of acceptance stop the blackmail? I'm not sure. But speaking of war crimes, why I put that question? I fully agree with you, Robin, that this is a long way when it comes to the international law and adjudication. But the ideology, the philosophy of responsibility or liability in such crimes doesn't work. This is my impression, and as a citizen, I offer it. We are a collective witness of war crimes. I witness war crimes in our country. And MH17, do you remember that flight? 8 years have elapsed. But what happened? What's the result? Is there any relief for the people who lost their loved ones? No, that side, they hate all the world. Any kind of adjudication they despise and resent, and they hate. I've seen those people, they hate life as such. And every time, every year, they hate more and more. So the crimes become more and more horrible, and there is no end to this process. So that's why I'm suggesting that we should rethink the structure of the international law in that respect. Let me say, answering your question, well, perhaps I can tell you the final truth after the end of this war. I feel that at this stage, my answer cannot be yet adequate, because at first we wanted to unite, to be strong together and stand up to the threat. And that was the fist of our people, clenched and hitting back the Russian military equipment or whatever. They were using the military apparatus they were using against us. And people, barehanded sometimes, in different ways, were trying to stop the equipment in the country roads to arrest their progress, even barehanded. But I've always been convinced that our people are strong. But I want to be fair there. I think that citizens, I do not wish that anyone any of your countries have a test, but if you have such an invasion, I think we cannot be sure that all the people, I'm convinced that all the adequate people would try to defend their country, their families, their households. So I think normal people think along those lines, naturally, just naturally. And I am just happy that we have such a number of normal, strong people, responsible people as our citizens. And I am also surprised with their bravery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.